Hi everyone, this is Sandra, and as promised, this is a tutorial on how to make whistles, which we'll be using in our whistling vessels. Um, Making whistles takes practice. Initially, it may not work. The sound may not be clear enough, but as you make more and more, and I suggest you make uh, about 30 to really get started. You just make them one after another. Try to figure out what method works for you and the sound that you're looking for. Playing around with sizes, with the tools. Um, so initially, it's best to try with larger whistles, just because as they get smaller, it becomes a bit more delicate of a process. And if you can get it when it's a little larger, then you're more likely to have success when the whistle is smaller. So we start with a ball of clay and we use our thumb to start opening it up using the pinch method, trying to make the walls about an even thickness, applying water to parts that start to crack. This clay that I'm using in this video was actually a little on the drier side and would dry quite quickly. So with the whistle, it's actually best to have somewhat drier clay. But if it's too dry, then obviously it can lead to cracks, and it can make it more complicated to make the air channel in the whistle itself. So in this next step, I'm starting to close the pinch pot by pressing evenly around the opening, and I'm fixing some imperfections there. Sorry, I'm a little off camera. This does not have to be perfect. As you gain more practice making whistles, you'll realize that most whistles will work once you understand the size of the hole, the size of the channel, the angle, and yeah, another reminder is that these whistles are used in whistling vessels, so they don't necessarily have to be that pretty. I'm not concerned about very pretty whistles. They're often hidden or undetectable, sometimes camouflaged. So here in this next step, I'm going to make a right angle on the whistle. And this is helpful when you haven't made that many whistles, because to this right angle, we're going to attach another little piece of clay that's going to be the mouthpiece to the whistle. So once you have somewhat of a right angle, it's kind of difficult to show from the camera angle, but and it's not a perfect right angle, of course. Once you have a right angle-ish, then you grab another piece of clay and you're going to attach it there, scoring, wetting the clay a little bit, and then attaching the mouthpiece, maybe reinforcing with a small coil. If your clay is very wet when making the whistle, it gets harder to actually make a successful whistle, because as you use the tool to make the air channel, wet clay will get stuck to the tool. As you blow into the whistle, the clay will get wetter and start flopping. So I recommend using somewhat dry clay. I mean, you can get an idea from the clay I'm using here. It's a good amount of dryness what I'm using. Maybe a little too dry. It could be a little softer, but it still works for the whistle. So here I've attached the mouthpiece, and I'm using this tool that I actually have to figure out what this tool is called in English. But it's the tool that I use to make whistles. It's essentially a small piece of bamboo that I've whittled down and sanded so that it's thin enough to make the air channel in the whistle, in the whistle mouthpiece. And I have another video explaining how to make this tool. You can use other tools. You can use popsicle sticks, for instance, or other random pieces of wood, or if you have bamboo growing in your garden, you can cut off a little piece of bamboo. But I like these bamboo tools, these bamboo chopsticks, because they're already thin, so you don't have to whittle away too much. It's pretty easy to get it to the shape that you like. And it's also more brittle than other types of wood. Anyway, so back to the tutorial. I've basically attached the coil so that the mouthpiece is secured to the hollow body of the whistle. So now all we need to do is make the air channel and the little window, which is how the whistle will be activated. It's important to always imagine how it's gonna work with the air channel crossing through the mouthpiece using this stick. If you make the mouthpiece too long, for instance, then you have to consider the length of your tool to ensure that it reaches all the way. I'm marking where I'm gonna make an opening in the body of the whistle. And I'm also marking the thickness of the wall of the ball of clay, just to get an idea of where I want to put that window, to make it as least complicated as possible to clean out that window. And now I'm starting to open up the windows, carefully removing clay. It's always best to make a smaller window than a larger window, because you can always make the window wider or longer, but if it's already too big, then it's hard to make it smaller. Unless the clay is wetter, then you can actually kind of just smush it a little bit, and it's more malleable and it's easier to fix. So there I've made a window, and I start to flatten one side of the window, the side that's going to be facing the air channel we're going to create, because as the air travels through the air channel, it will hit this edge that I'm creating, and the way the air splits on this edge is what actually activates the whistle. So I'm pushing clay away on the sides, and I'm making that edge thin by pressing it from the inside and then pushing with my thumb. Again, this takes practice. You might push the hole too deep initially, which is quite normal. And then I'm lining up the air channel with that edge, because I want the air to travel through directly to that edge. The hole that you're going to make in the mouthpiece should not be too wide as well. Otherwise, you need more air to activate the whistle. And a key component to a whistle used in a whistling vessel is that it's very sensitive. So here I'm pointing out, I've used the tool to open the air channel, and as it comes out into the ball of clay, it pushes some clay out as well. Ideally, we remove as much of this clay as possible, very carefully, so as not to damage or open the hollow ball. So now it's gone all the way through, and it's lined up to that edge pretty well. So I push the stick in and out just a little bit to clean up the air channel. Again, if your clay is very wet, that technique of pushing in and out may not work to your advantage. And now I'm removing some clay, some other clay that came out as I push the tool through the mouthpiece. And so now I'm angling that edge of the whistle so that as the air travels through the mouthpiece, it should hit that edge, and it should be about a 45-degree angle, 40 to 45-degree angle. As I said earlier, whistles work surprisingly well once you get the hang of it. It's not, you don't have to have a perfect angle. So the whistle already worked. Then there's ways to improve the sound of the whistle if needed. Something you should aim for is making a whistle that will activate by just blowing from a distance, blowing into the mouthpiece. So maybe from a few inches or 10 centimeters from the mouthpiece, being able to blow in and the whistle should activate. And so the idea is you make a bunch of whistles. In fact, I get started on another whistle right away. So to not bore you, I basically make another smaller whistle using the same approach, the same method. First using my thumb to open it up. Obviously it's a smaller body. So that goes quicker. Then I close it up by evenly pressing the sides together once I have the hollow ball. Then I make a right angle, which is where I attach the mouthpiece. I score the clay. I slightly wet the mouth, both pieces of clay. And then I reinforce with a coil. And this is where sometimes working with a smaller whistle gets a little more difficult because it's easier to damage it, or as you start opening the hole in the body, it's also easier to make the hole too big, which is actually what happens in this whistle initially. I also almost cut myself with the knife. So for this whistle, a slightly smaller wooden tool would have been more useful, but I still managed to make it with what I had available. So I'm figuring out where to make the air channel, or where to line up the air channel with the edge of that opening. And then I press through, I clean out the clay that comes through the air channel. This part can be a little trickier if you don't have that much practice, because it's just, as I mentioned before, easier to make the air channel hole too wide. So this whistle, because it's smaller, has a higher sound. And here are the other whistles, and I blow on them just to give you an idea of the sound. The larger the whistle, the lower the note. The higher the whistle, the higher the note. It just depends which you're looking for in the piece that you make. Something to keep in mind, though, is that the larger the whistle, the more air you need to activate it. So it needs to be a highly sensitive whistle if you want it to work with whistling vessels. So moving right along, I'm gonna show you another approach to making a whistle. As I mentioned earlier, it's really up to you to decide what approach works best for you. These are just two ways to make whistles, but there are a lot of different methods. In this approach, we'll be making a pinch pot, as in the first whistle, the first two whistles. But instead of closing it with our fingers into a hollow ball, We'll leave it as in like a bowl shape, and then attach a flat section of clay to it. And this approach makes it a little easier to find that 90-degree angle, to also control the thickness of the walls. But it's essentially the same idea. I'm going to just fast forward here. So we're just fast forwarding through the pinching section where we're making a semicircle, making the walls evenly thin. And then I take another piece of clay, make it large enough to cover this bowl shape, flatten it out so it's about the same thickness as the bowl shape. And once I'm happy with what I have and it's big enough to cover the bowl, then I cut it to size if needed. So I just get rid of all the excess clay, and then I seal the two pieces of clay together. So now I'm just defining that right angle. I already have a flat surface at the top, and so it makes that edge easier to achieve. And then I'll start making the mouthpiece, and as in the last whistles, once you have a rectangular shape for the mouthpiece, you simply attach it by scoring, applying water, and reinforcing with a coil. The result is essentially the same as in the other approaches, a mouthpiece connected to a hollow body. And now I'm indicating where I'm going to cut out a hole in this body so that once the air channel is created, the air can hit the edge, the back edge of this window or this hole, and activate the whistle in the same way as in the other whistles. This is perhaps a more controlled approach to creating a whistle. And in the beginning it might be helpful, and as you gain more practice you probably won't find it necessary. It's also a nice method if you want to make ocarinas, because it's a more symmetrical shape to begin with, kind of like almost like a turtle shape if you flip it over. So I'm just flattening that edge with my thumb. You want to make sure not to push too hard when you do that. It doesn't have to be paper thin, but it should definitely be thinner than the rest of the clay. And now I'm indicating where I'm going to press the hole, and I just go for it. And then I clean out the clay that comes through, as in the first whistles. I don't actually suggest you use this knife tool for this. Anything with like a thin edge works. The knife is a little risky because it can slip and then you can cut open your finger or cut open the whistle, which is what I almost did with the second whistle I made. But it is useful to get little pieces of clay out like that. Every time you remove clay, wipe off your tool, because you'll just leave the clay you removed back in the whistle if you don't wipe it off, especially when the clay is wet. So the air channel lines up pretty well with the edge already, but I'm just making that angle, which is again a 40-45 degree angle. Even 35 works. So the whistle already works. That probably would work fine for a whistling vessel, but there's something a little weak in the sound. So I go in and try to clean out the air channel just one more time. Make sure it's not too thick, and the whistle improves a little bit, but I feel like it could be even more clear. If you don't have experience making whistles, just stop there. As soon as it works, leave it. So now it sounds a lot clearer. It's more what I was looking for. It also works when I blow from a distance. You can't see it on the camera, but I blow from a distance and it still activates. And so now I decide to make it an ocarina by creating a hole. And it's an ocarina. And this allows me to play 2 notes. But you'll find that if the whistle is not made properly or very precisely, then the second note, the highest note, won't work. And so you have to try to make the whistle function as best as possible, and then you'll hear both notes clearly. And so now I'm just going in for the third hole. I'm kind of testing the limits of this whistle with these holes. So as you can hear, this ocarina doesn't work on the highest note. And right now there's 3 notes to this ocarina, and they should all sound clear. If they don't, then there's something wrong with the air channel, with the edge, with that little hole or window. Maybe there's some clay that's blocking the air channel, that's sticking out. And the whistle should work for all 3 notes clearly. And then you know that it's a pretty sensitive whistle. So I'm pretty happy with that. I won't use that in a whistling vessel, but it's good practice to just try to improve the sound as much as possible. And now I decide to cut open the whistle so that we can see what it looks like inside. So this is a cross section of the whistle. Notice the size of the hollow section. Notice the air channel, which got a little squish, but that's about the thickness of the air channel, which is the thickness of the stick I use. As the air travels through, it hits that edge right there. And it splits on that edge, and that's what creates the whistle sound. That's the angle of the edge. Even though there's these pieces of clay in there, the whistle still works. So it's just an example of how imperfect your whistle can be, and it should still work.